Greenland is sitting on a geopolitical time bomb. The world's largest island has a landmass greater than France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and the UK combined, with room still to spare. But the vast area contains a population smaller than the tiny state of Andorra. It's a land of ice and freezing temperatures, isolated from the rest of the world. But many of the globe's most powerful nations, they're suddenly racing to claim this frozen island. Not influence, not partnership, control. So, in this video, we're going to explore, firstly, how geography became Greenland's prison and protector. Secondly, what's driving the new interest in this Arctic land. Thirdly, and finally, why 56,000 people could reshape global power. Now, let's go back to where this isolation began. Viewing Greenland from the air, you're presented with what looks like an endless ice sheet. No cities, no roads, no signs of human life for thousands of kilometers. Welcome to one of the world's harshest environments. In Greenland, there are 0 roads connecting towns. 0. Most travel between settlements by boat, helicopter, plane, dog sled, and snowmobile. Why? Because 80% of Greenland, it isn't just empty land, it's a solid block of ice, larger than Iran. At its thickest point, this ice sheet plunges 3 kilometers deep. The remaining 20% of Greenland's landmass also proves challenging for habitation. It's made up of thousands of isolated pockets of barren rock, deep fjords and mountains. It's these geographical hurdles which makes connecting the small number of settlements tough. This ice creates its own weather systems. Katabatic winds rush down from the ice sheet at enormous speeds without warning, making agriculture a nightmare and turning daily survival into a constant battle. Yet, this same ice, which has warned off most settlers for millennia, is also hiding something that could change everything. Something that will soon make the world's superpowers circle like predators. But if this place is so hostile to human life, why has anyone ever tried to call it home? For thousands of years, Greenland has been running an experiment in human endurance. The result? Most test subjects don't survive. The first humans arrived around 2500 BCE. Paleo-Eskimo peoples, absolute masters of Arctic survival. Even these experts found life precarious on Greenland. There were periods in history where archaeological records show gaps, where it appears Greenland lay unpopulated. Civilizations didn't just struggle here, they vanished without trace. But in 985 CE, something fascinating happened. A group of people decided they were going to try and beat this harsh place by completely ignoring everything it was trying to teach them. This decision would create one of history's most chilling examples of how stubbornness can erase an entire society. Norse Vikings, led by Eric the Red, who had been banished from Iceland for murder, sailed west and found sheltered fjords along Greenland's coast. To attract settlers to this frozen wasteland, Eric pulled off history's greatest marketing scam. He named it Greenland. The Norse didn't adapt to the Arctic. They tried to force European farming onto lands that wanted nothing to do with it. Cattle, sheep, goats, stone churches, and grand halls. For nearly 500 years, they made it work through sheer willpower. At its peak, up to 5,000 people were thought to be living on Greenland in this era. And then they disappeared completely. By the mid-1300s, entire settlements stood abandoned. The last written record, a wedding ceremony in 1408. When Europeans returned centuries later, they found only empty ruins. What happened to them reveals the brutal mechanics of how geography erases civilizations. The Norse collapse began with the climate turning against them. They'd arrived during unusually mild temperatures that made farming possible. Around 1300, the Little Ice Age struck. Summers became shorter and colder, devastating their crops. They couldn't grow enough hay to keep livestock alive through brutal winters. Sea ice began choking shipping lanes to Europe for longer stretches each year. Their lifeline to the outside world slowly strangled. Then, their economy imploded. Their most valuable export, walrus ivory, became worthless when cheaper elephant ivory from Africa flooded European markets. The Norse didn't adapt to their environment, they persisted with practices which were failing. This brought their demise. But not every group who settled on this land suffered the same fate. Some indeed thrived. While the Norse were dying out, the Thule people, who are the ancestors to all modern-day Inuits, weren't just surviving the same conditions, they were flourishing. The Thule arrived around 1200 CE from the west. They possessed something the Norse never understood: perfect adaptation to ice, not resistance against it. Where the Norse were rigid, the Thule were flexible. Where the Norse built permanent structures, the Thule stayed mobile. Where the Norse fought the environment, the Thule worked with it. Their entire culture was engineered for Arctic reality: kayaks made from sealskin that could handle crushing seas. The Norse tried to import European-style farming. The Thule took to hunting sea mammals such as seals, walrus, and whales. Dog sled teams turned frozen wasteland into transportation networks. The colder climate that killed the Norse was actually an advantage for the Thule. More sea ice meant better hunting grounds for the seals they depended on. This contrast, it teaches Greenland's fundamental law: the land doesn't bend to you, you have to adapt to it, or you vanish. The Thule's success story on Greenland has lasted generations, a legacy which is still felt within the modern population. However, the ancestors of the Norse settlers who had vanished in the 1400s returned. In the 1700s, missionary Hans Eel from Denmark-Norway, which was under one crown at the time, arrived on Greenland's shores to re-establish contact with the lost Norse settlements. The Danish-Norwegian Union began to take on greater control of Greenland, and when the Union dissolved, the Danes claimed Greenland as a colony of its own. During World War II, Germany occupied Denmark, and the Danish control of its distant island colony dwindled. The US immediately saw an opportunity and set up air bases on Greenland, using it as a strategic location to monitor and protect Arctic and Atlantic shipping routes, along with the island itself. In the aftermath of World War II and the defeat of Nazi Germany, Greenland was handed back to the Danes, and in 1953 became an official part of the Kingdom of Denmark. The US military presence that arrived on Greenland in World War II is still there today. The Cold War made this occupation permanent. Over the past 70 years, greater autonomy has been handed to Greenlanders to run their own affairs, although the Danish overarching control remains. Pushes for independence have faced significant barriers, some economic and some due to the geopolitical importance of Greenland to world superpowers. Their economy rests on two pillars, and both are crumbling. First, fishing, which makes up around 90% of exports. One bad season, and the economy crashes. Second, the big one, a massive annual subsidy from Denmark, approximately 500 to 700 million per year. This represents more than half the government's budget and more than a quarter of the entire GDP. The independence paradox is vicious. To be truly independent, Greenland must replace that $500 million subsidy. Without it, the modern state simply cannot function. But finding that money means developing other income streams in one of the most logistically challenging and most expensive places on the planet. The cost of everything is astronomical. A liter of milk costs close to $10, and a flight from Copenhagen to Nuuk can cost more than a crossing from the UK to the US. This economic fragility could change in the future, and it's what's happening beneath the ice which could provide the answers. Although, it could also open up a whole new can of problems for those who live on Greenland. Some aren't waiting to find out, and the numbers tell a story of a quiet exodus. Greenland's population holds steady at around 56,000, but there's a hidden hemorrhaging. Many hundreds of people leave annually, particularly young and educated Greenlanders, who migrate often to Denmark for opportunities that simply don't exist at home. Denmark's forced relocations and boarding schools in the mid-20th century shattered traditional ways of life. The result? Some of the world's highest suicide rates, particularly among young people. The physical emptiness, those massive distances between communities, only deepens the social isolation. Modern Greenland faces the same adaptation test that destroyed the Norse and empowered the Thule. Meanwhile, all this takes place under the increasing presence of other major nations. The Arctic is warming 3 to 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. The Greenland ice sheet is melting at rates that defy comprehension. Hundreds of billions of tons are disappearing every year. This is devastating for traditional Inuit culture. The stable sea ice that served as dog sled highways is becoming unreliable. Hunters get stranded, food security crumbles. But as the ice melts, it's revealing something that potentially changes everything: huge untapped mineral wealth. Iron, gold, uranium, and most crucially, rare earth elements, the metals critical for smartphones, electric vehicles, and military hardware. These aren't just valuable resources, they're the foundation of 21st century power. Global superpowers are now increasingly interested in Greenland's affairs and the future of the island, which is setting the stage for the new Great Game. Think about what's really at stake here. For the likes of the United States, China, and Russia, Greenland is a treasure chest of rare earth elements and a lucrative source of business. It also has strategic importance. The US has used it as an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Arctic since the 1940s, critical for monitoring Russian and Chinese activities. Whoever has the control or a presence on this island has a military leg up in the Northern Hemisphere. As Arctic ice melts, new shipping routes are opening, reducing the time taken to transport goods across from Asia to Europe by up to 40%. Greenland sits at a key waypoint on these routes. This is something the Danes aren't going to want to give up quickly, and the Europeans will want to ensure they have a friendly ally controlling the trajectory of this increasingly important island. The climate change threatening to destroy Greenland's ancient culture may also unlock economic prosperity, which naturally Greenlanders want to have a slice of. But here's the terrifying reality. When superpowers compete for resources, small nations often lose their sovereignty entirely. The future of Greenland is uncertain, and the might of some of the world's most powerful nations will not go away quickly. Greenland's story reveals an uncomfortable truth about how geography becomes destiny. The Norse had 500 years to understand the land they settled on, but became unstuck due to their lack of flexibility to the geographical and climate demands of the island. The Thule succeeded because they built their entire identity around the environmental reality. Today, Greenland faces the same choice, but the stakes are global. Other Arctic nations made different strategic decisions. Norway leveraged oil wealth into a $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund. Alaska balanced resource extraction with citizen dividends. Iceland developed geothermal independence and became a tourism powerhouse. Greenland could choose sustainable development over the resource extraction race. They could leverage climate research and renewable energy. They could build on traditional knowledge rather than abandoning it. But time is running out as global powers encircle like vultures. So, what is Greenland actually doing with this unprecedented opportunity? They're caught between the competing visions of their future, unable to choose their own path. Denmark wants to maintain control while appearing to support autonomy. China offers mining partnerships with invisible strings attached. The US demands strategic allegiance in exchange for investment. Instead of asserting independent strategy, Greenland is letting outside powers define their options and is trying to dance between competing superpowers. It's a delicate balance, and one that will continue to play out on the frozen island for years to come. The ice that created this isolation is disappearing. What replaces it will reshape not just Greenland, but the entire global power balance. Greenland exists at the intersection of brutal geography, adaptation history, and modern geopolitical reality. Its isolation was carved by ice, enforced by distance, and maintained by economics. But an island that was once a distant icy land has suddenly become one of the planet's most valuable territories. As the ice melts, the question is, what happens when the world decides such emptiness is too valuable to remain untouched? For foreign powers who try to muscle in, they'll be faced by similar geographical challenges which invaders and colonizers faced throughout history. Greenland's vast emptiness is about to become a very crowded stage, and how Greenlanders harness the geographic and economic potential will decide the island's future.